Hello, and what I would like to talk about today is my definition of the difference between nervousness and anxiety. Nervousness is something that's usually short-lived. You're going to take a test, and then that test is over. You may be upset about taking it, worried about what your score may be, right? It upsets you for a while, but it was about something, and it was manageable. It wasn't like you were afraid about this test all day, all the time, that it was very specific. It was temporal. You knew once you got past it that that would be done and it wouldn't bother you again. Real anxiety, the kind of fear that you might need medication, you might need therapy, you might need some other help with, is kind of the opposite. It's usually long-term. Now, I don't mean... I'll get back to that. It's long-term. It's more days of the week than not, more days of the month than not, for months and months. In many cases, the person doesn't really know why it is that they're upset or that they're fearful. One of the things that's really common with, say, panic attack is you ask them, what was it that set you off? I don't know. Well, when did you notice that you were upset? Well, when I was hyperventilating and I could feel my heart jumping out of my chest. That's kind of a little late. Many people, I think in many cases, can tell when they're getting upset way before that. But this is such a strong fear that people are affected very quickly, and it sort of spirals out of control very quickly. That's kind of the crux of the anxiety as well, is that it is not manageable. Instead of saying this is something that I have to get over and that after this particular point in time that it'll be finished, that it isn't. It's never done. This anxiety goes on and on and on. Now, I was listening to the rewind of the tape I just made, and I made it sound like this person was some sort of like drooling basket case who couldn't hardly get out of their own home, and that's not accurate. Some people's anxiety is so focused that they try to avoid it, and that if they can avoid that anxiety-producing thing, then they can actually be completely normal. The problem becomes, depending on what it is that they're fearful of, they may not be able to avoid that thing. For example, something that's a phobia, something where you come into contact with it, you freak out, you can't breathe anymore, you can't focus. That would be, I feel that's just irrational. What kinds of things could provoke an anxiety? It could be something that a person is phobic about. They may have a phobia of spiders. So every other day of the week, every day of the month, they're fine up until the point at which they come into contact with a spider. Depending on where you are, that kind of contact may be more or less likely. Sometimes, though, anxiety-producing things are not as descript. Someone may have a fear of death, but they don't want to acknowledge that. They sort of explain away, well, why were you fearful of being on the freeway? Oh, there were so many cars. I had a hard time paying attention to all of them. They were all going so fast. And it's not that that's false, but what they're really fearful of, in my example, is they're afraid of getting into a car accident and actually dying, which is not the same thing as being afraid of cars going fast around you. Does that make sense? So, nervousness, mild, kind of something you can handle, versus anxiety, something you may not be able to handle. These are some descriptors of anxiety. The first one, difficult to control, really means exactly that. This fear is in your mind all the time. Interferes with functioning. That is, at work, at home, when you're on your own time, it is always around. Excessive and pervasive worry, meaning that it's always around you, constantly. Not only is it difficult to control, but it invades every space of your life, at home, at work, with interpersonal relationships, friends, even in your work. In this section, I just need you to know that you need 3 of these in order to be diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, specifically for this set. What I want to emphasize is it says restless. This does not mean that maybe 1 or 2 days out of the month you feel restless or irritability. This would be a case in which these things are around you all the time, maybe 4 to 7 days a week, so almost every day. That not just during 1 week, but multiple weeks for multiple months. Where it says muscle tension, this may cause headaches, muscle strain, and sleep and eating, meaning that disturbances, meaning you may eat more or less, you may sleep more or less than normal. What happens here is that you may think that someone who is worried all the time would not be able to deal with small stresses like getting children up in the morning, getting children to school, getting to work on time yourself, and being able to cope with deadlines. Actually, what happens is the person tries very quickly to deal with these kinds of things, maybe ineffectually, but dealing with them nonetheless, in order to focus all of their time, or most all of their time, on the thing that bothers them the most. It's irrational. In the realm of all possibility, could you be the victim of a crime? Yes, but the likelihood in this case for a person with anxiety about that is probably very low, for it to be irrational anyway. If you live in a high crime area, then such a fear would not be irrational. But most people, most of the time, in most of their lives, are not likely to be a victim of a crime. And I was thinking violent crime when I wrote this. I wanted to give a couple of examples. They both have to do with OCD, but things that are anxiety, that show anxiety. One is someone with OCD and that they were walking home from high school, and that if they didn't get to a certain step at a certain light post, they had to go all the way back to school and start over again. If I remember correctly, this person did not live very far away from the school, but sometimes it took them all afternoon to get back home. So if they didn't get to the correct step, so what? So why? Why would they go back? The fear is if they don't get this thing perfect, then they themselves are not perfect. Or that in getting this behavior perfect, they are preventing something bad from happening, which in and of itself is kind of irrational. But in their minds, it doesn't matter. It just has to be done. And as long as it can be done, then they're okay. The problem then becomes, what happens if they can't finish? What happens if it takes them so long that they never get home? That in itself creates anxiety as well. One of the things that they do in therapy is trying to get the person to realize, what is it that you're really afraid of? And is this something that's rational, irrational? If it's rational, is there something that we can do to modify this fear? For example, I know now I am not going to that dentist who grabs me around the face, right? But, and the dentist I have who is very good, and I know that it won't take very long, and after I'm done, that everything will be fine. And then in fact, he or she is not hurting me. But it's still tough. In many cases, people with anxiety also feel badly about themselves. In therapy, that's one of the things that you would work on. Is this fear rational? Is there something you can do to mediate your fear? Can you think through what is going to happen and prove to yourself that nothing bad, no bad outcome is likely to happen? But it's fear. That's an autonomic bodily response, and sometimes is very, very difficult. However, the more that you understand it, the more you can modify your thoughts, the better you can cope with it. Thank you.